Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge with Jon and Pete Najarian. Jared handling the rest of the chores. And boy, do we have a market that's zooming, but to the downside. You want to know why? Come back after the break and we'll tell you. Bang!
We had such a great close to the week, John. Such a great close to the week. And then all of a sudden we come in and we like, whoa.
Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what several people, Pete, in the media called me up this morning and said, why are we down so hard? And I said, well, you do know the rest of the world traded yesterday, right? And they're like, well, yeah. And I said, and they were all down hard, right? They don't even know.
Yeah.
But they were.
Yeah.
The rest of the world of the major economies was pretty much hemorrhaging. It was in the red yesterday. And we pretty much have a global trade that goes on, folks. And it goes, from the three different primary time zones, 8 hours in each one. You've got the US, you've got Japan, and then you've got Europe. And then it spins back around again. And if those other two economies are down, it's kind of hard for us to be up unless we had some really market-moving news, which we didn't have. So instead, we focus on things like China, or as our former colleagues on CNBC would say, Pete, China.
Yeah. I don't miss those guys throwing an R at the end of that ever again. That's the dumbest thing
China.
ever.
But China numbers aren't good.
No.
And that's right where I'll go, Pete, to start it off with the Rebel's Edge today. Macro Minute. Recent data out of China indicates that the slowdown continues. It didn't just happen. It has been a progressively negative move out of China. And so their PMI output, it fell to 50. You guys probably know this, but anything over 50 is expansionary. You're shrinking back down to 50, you're not expanding. And August and manufacturing activity contracted for the fourth month in a row. So I'm going to throw that out, Pete, as my macro minute.
Yeah, that's exactly right, John. I think that the one other thing that we can look at is that we always look ahead, at least we try to. And so we do look back a little bit because I think you have to learn from looking back at what happened yesterday, and what we're seeing globally certainly is pulling on the markets. Now, that all being said, I think I always like to look at, just like you, John, the various catalysts. It was, obviously the big meetings that were in Wyoming not too terribly long ago, right? And then it's this thing, then it's the next thing. It was NVIDIA. We waited for that. We're always waiting for the next thing, which I think is what makes this job so much fun in a lot of ways, is we're waiting for the next thing. And I think right now people are wondering about the job reports. That's what this week looks like. Were things overstated? All of those questions are going to probably be answered as we get deeper into this week. And that's probably some of the biggest catalysts this week. That all being said, you're exactly right on the global side of things, pulling on our markets, and they're getting beat up. We were only down a couple of hundred early, and they've doubled the losses so far, at least, down over 400 points on both the NASDAQ and the Dow, and then throw in down 80 for the S&P. So that's almost a 1.5% move, John. So where is that VIX? Let me see. It doesn't work according to a bunch of morons that always say that. It does work because we're sitting there exactly where we should be for the VIX right now.
Well, in fact, fantastic futures. Take that away, Pete. I'll go after you. You already started the VIX off.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped right into it. But here's the reality of it all. We were in the 12s and locked and loaded in the 12s for a heck of a long time. Then we slid up just a little bit. We call it maybe 14 to 18, maybe. I mean, a couple times you'd get to 19 for a day, and that was it. But volatility is a big portion of everything that we're looking at, right? And how accurate it truly is. So we went up to 65 on August 5th. We pulled back that same day. We closed in the mid 30s, and then it was down. Now, well, we've got a little bit of a lift going on right now in the VIX. And as a matter of fact, I would call it that we are in a bit of a 14, call it to 18 sort of an area right now for the volatility index. We've been at 14 a lot. We've pushed up at 18 and pulled right back. Today we got to about 18.5. We've pulled off of that just a little bit. So we'll be in the 18s if it stands. And oh, by the way, a 16 VIX, that's a 1% move every single day. And 18, a little bit more than a 1% move every day. Today, we've moved up 1.3%. I'd say the damn VIX is pretty accurate, John.
Yep, still pretty accurate, Pete.
Yeah.
And I'll just finish up, folks, with since I spent a fair amount of time at the top talking about China. If China's slowing and if they've contracted for 4 months in a row, which is not an if, it's a fact that they've contracted 4 months in a row, well, that's why we're seeing crude oil down 4% today, because China is a massive consumer of coal and crude oil. And if they're contracting, they're not going to be using as much of either, Pete. So yeah, they can store it just like we can, but in the 70s, it ain't as attractive to just stick it in the ground. They're probably just saying, let me hold off and see if I can pick it up a little cheaper. That's my take.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, now let's talk, Pete, about Vaxcyte. Now, as the name implies, Vaxcyte is a experimental pneumococcal vaccine. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that they have this thing called Vax31 that is a trial that they've been going through, and its profile is very similar to Pfizer, Pete, without the same billions that Pfizer can throw at multiple vaccines and so forth. These guys have been doing pretty well. And you know what? We also had unusual activity. So take a look at this one, folks. October 90 calls. They were buying those with the stock basically $76. Where's the stock today? About 116. Bang! So those calls up huge. If you had any of those calls, folks, like some of our subscribers did, bang, it's a very good day for you.
And it's why we do what we do, John. We talked about, we used to stand on the trading floors, and when the flood of activity comes in like that, it can be very, very fruitful. And in this case, it was. And you take a look at what these guys are looking at here, John. Part of the reason this stock is up as much as 30%, by the way, is the fact that they're talking about this is basically a $10 billion market value right now in what they're doing. And they're going up against the big boys. And from the numbers that they got, they seem to be extremely excited about this. Like they're going to take over the big boys, including Pfizer, in this particular space. Now, that's pretty cool. How about the fact that they think in the future, very close future, this could be a $24 billion marketplace. So I'd say Vaxcyte is in the right spot. Now, let's always remember this one thing, though. They don't have anything out on the market yet. They had great numbers. This is going into phase 3, right? So that's something that looks like it's going to be probably a layup based upon all these great numbers. It still has to go through the process, though, so there could be a stumble, maybe, maybe not. Doesn't mean it absolutely does, but it is something interesting. And by the way, they do have a fairly deep pipeline, not huge, but they've got another that's not far away from going towards that phase 3, and a few others out there that are preclinical or phase 1. So we've got that, in the backdrop, but this is a major number, John, and the volumes, the absolute volume of shares that was trading in the first, call it 90 minutes, absolutely dwarfs the average day for all the right reasons. When a stock goes up 30%, that's got a market cap and something north of 20 billion, I'd say that's a pretty big move.
Yeah, I'd say it's a huge move, Pete. All right, let's talk about SHLS. So Shoals, believe it or not, Pete, I had this one on the Rebel's Edge just recently. Now, not the Rebel's Edge, I'm sorry. I had it on 3 at 3, Pete.
3 at 3.
And this one, they were in a big patent dispute. Well, turns out they're going to have that, just as Jared's headline says there, a big IP win, intellectual property. Okay, so they were in here buying September calls that expire this Friday, and they were buying them at the 5 strike, Pete. Well, those calls for 54 cents traded all the way up today to $2. Now, that's not quite 4X, but it's certainly better than 3X. So if you're somebody that likes to get 300% returns and define your risk on entry, if you paid 54 cents for 10 of those, since every option's for 100 shares, would have been $540. you could have traded out of it for as much as $2,000 or even what it just said on the screen there, $1,600. You like that for a return, folks? Well, you should, because it's a heck of a lot more than anything anybody else on TV is talking about.
Oh yeah. These guys that get so excited over, hey, you know what? We're up
2%
3%.
return. It's 3% in a week. Imagine that. How about 300%?
Yeah, we don't wake up for 3%. Anyway, there's a hell of a lot of shorts in this one, John. When you look at it, it's amazing because you look at this company and you go, well, it's probably a really stretched company, right? I mean, based upon the PE and all the rest of it. No, the answer is not there. It's a 14 forward PE for Shoals. So there's a lot of reasons to be interested in this one. The energy transmission that they're doing, and it's going to be interesting to see how much it can get back up there, though, John, because this thing got beaten down. I mean, we're looking at a stock that was $5.22 at the high end in the last 52 weeks. It's only around $6 or thereabouts, and so I think that if it can continue this momentum, and probably if it was a better trading day than it is when we're down 84 points on the S&P, this might be up even more. It's not right now, but this is definitely one to keep an eye on. And at $5, whether it's options or stock alone, this one potentially has some upside that could be in existence that could be really, really solid, I think, in the future.
Yeah, it's a heck of a deal, Shoals Technology, and this could certainly keep the stock moving to the upside. And those shorts Pete talked about, it's not a good day for them.
No.
All right. How about CleanSpark, Pete? CLSK. You and I were talking about it before we came on air. It's not just down because Bitcoin softened up a little. It's also down because when you look at the facts here, Pete, their total Bitcoin sold in August was not nearly as much the total Bitcoins that these guys mined and so forth. They mined 470, well, I'm sorry, they're 4,586 for the year, 478 Bitcoins in the month of August alone. Many of you know that you get reward, proof of work, if you will. You get a reward for solving this equation. That's what miners do. And these guys have a ton of those rigs out there, Pete. But you know what? They're not getting as many Bitcoins rewarded to them right now as they had been in previous months. And that's why stock is down.
Yeah, they acquired somebody else, John, for 155 million. Grid infrastructure. That's kind of an interesting move. Another thing that kind of concerns me, however, is you look at the balance sheet right now. They are burning cash and burning cash and burning cash, and it is not fundamentally something that looks all that great. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean it can't move around a little bit and something to be pretty excited about. When you're burning 270 million and you start to look at, well, what do we look like as far as cash and debt? It's not a pretty picture. So I'm not painting that this is a hugely negative thing going forward, but it certainly is something you want to know about for sure. And there's a good reason why this one, when you're looking at a little over $3 to $24, that's your 52-week range. And this thing's trading 940 or somewhere in the nines. I'd say it's getting slammed pretty good. By the way, that Vaxcyte, I said 20 billion. 12 billion is the market cap for that one as well.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of money in Bitcoin mining, folks. But boy, does it take a lot of power, and does it take a lot of computing power as well. Not just the power that you're drawing from the grid, but the power of those chips running all of these calculations of this mathematical formula that just gets longer and longer and longer. All right, let's finish up, Pete, with Boeing. Down about 8%. We have UOA, unusual option activity, in this one for today. In other words, did we precede it? Did we have it last week? I'm not saying we did, but we have it today. People are betting that it goes below 160 because they're buying the 160 puts. And Boeing, according to a number of folks that looked at it, including one of the top analysts in the field, he said, you know what? I'm taking my target down. I don't like the way this thing's shaping up. And it's a prove it to me state right now for the new CEO. So he's got some proving to do, because Boeing, a new 52-week low today, Pete, 158.30.
ouch is number one. And it's a 52-week low, like you said. 267 was the high, John. So it's a company that we've been watching almost every day. Everybody has. It's all about, the safety and the concerns. And it seems like there's a story. Always, it seems like on the negative side. Now you've got a new CEO who's going to have to take over for this thing. They've lost $15 billion in market cap over the last 6 months. I mean, Boeing just can't seem to fly right, no pun intended. But when you look at Wells Fargo, they're talking about 119 is now the target. 119. We're trading, call it 158, 160, whatever. They're looking for something very, very negative to continue on. It's not like it just suddenly came up. Continuing to see this thing go further down. And they actually changed what their thoughts, and they moved it to underweight as well. There's not a whole lot of positives that I can take out of this, other than the fact that at least the Chinese, and they are not necessarily our friends, but they started buying those 737 Maxes, John, again, a while back. And that could be something that might at least help and put a little Band-Aid onto a wound. The problem is the wound's pretty damn big and the Band-Aid's pretty small.
Yeah, it's, and Pete, there's space side of Boeing, because of course they basically stranded 2 astronauts up there.
Yeah.
And, Elon Musk is going to help out supposedly by sending, one of his Falcon 9s or whatever up there to rescue those astronauts. Otherwise, with Boeing, Pete, they're talking about those astronauts being up there for a couple years because Boeing can't get a safe spacecraft up there to get them down. That's a pretty tight space to be with somebody, stuck with somebody for a couple years for a mission that was supposed to be a couple weeks. Let me tell you that. You'd be going stir crazy, I think, if you're somebody up there.
Can you imagine? I mean, honestly, I can't even imagine. You're sitting there up in outer space. I mean, the worst thing that can happen outside of being killed or dead or something is being alive and knowing you ain't going nowhere.
Yeah.
That's just brutal. God.
Well, like Alien always says, Pete, in space, no one can hear you scream.
Yeah. Jesus.
There's a new Alien movie coming out. That's where that's from, folks. But it's also from the first Aliens. All right. Let's talk, Pete, for a minute about this video, because whenever we can, folks, we love to share these videos with you. I think you guys will get a kick out of this one, because the Ravens, one of my picks, and I think maybe Pete's as well, to win the AFC.
Yeah.
These guys aren't dummies, but this isn't about players. This is about maximizing the value of your stadium without ruining it. So let's take a look at a creative thing that these guys did, Pete.
Baltimore Ravens just made over $100,000 in 4 hours by keeping their stadium empty.
How great is that?
See, every year a handful of NFL teams, including
Nobody
the
else
Ravens,
is-
utilize the offseason to generate extra revenue with their stadiums. This often involves hosting concerts and other sporting events, all of which can generate revenue, but also cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I was
if
at
not
US
more
Bank
to
not
host.
long
But
ago.
what if there was a way teams could just keep most of the stadium empty while still generating 6 figures in revenue? Well, there is, and it's probably one of the coolest ideas in sports, because just last weekend the Ravens sold out each one of their 128 private suites to fans to host their fantasy football
private
draft.
suites.
The package,
That's
which
amazing.
sold out almost instantly,
That's where the
gives
money
you
is,
and
though,
14
right?
friends access to your own private suites for 4 hours, which
Bang is
includes
right.
all-you-can-eat food and drink, as well as a self-guided tour of the locker room
All
and the
you can eat food
sideline
and
before the
drink.
draft. Each room also
That's
comes
a
with a custom
steal.
draft board, and the
Look at
total
that,
cost
the
for
draft
all of this
board
is
all
just
there for you and everything?
$920, or about $61 per person. And if you multiply that by each one of
Yeah,
the
just make it
128
$100 a
suites the
person
team likely
instead of
sold,
61.
that's over $117,000 in revenue the Ravens generated from a random Saturday afternoon. To see what the full experience was like, go check out my
That's
friend
sheer
Matt's video
brilliance.
tagged below.
Just amazing. Tyler.m.web. Put that up, folks. And wow. If I would have known, Pete, I would have gone there for our league. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that's nothing. 60 some odd dollars. Whose bar tab isn't that if you went to a bar to do your, your draw for your fantasy football team?
Yeah.
Everybody's is. If you get a burger and a couple beers and things like that, and by the time you get around to the tip and so forth, yeah, you're in the $60 range pretty fast.
Yeah,
And this one, you're in the stadium? Hell yes. Every team should be doing this.
I think they're underpricing this thing. I think they could do a lot better than that. You know what? I know that the economy's not great. I know, but we also know people are willing to spend if they feel like it's going to make them feel better about whatever. The Minnesota State Fair, John, the other day, I couldn't walk. On Sunday, you barely could move. And it was, there's an expression out there that I can't use, but you were right next to a lot of elbows and something else. But it was busy walking down the streets to the point where I just went, the hell with this, I'm going home. I've been here 5 times. That's enough out of 10. And I took off. All right, let's jump to a little sports, John.
All right.
We got NCAA football, right? It kicked off. It actually kicked off 2 weeks ago, but it's kicked off now. Now, here's the interesting part about 2 weeks ago. Well, what was the first game? Well, it was a big one. Florida State was going to be stepping out. They had Georgia Tech as an opponent. They were a great team last year. Everybody was so mad at me and anybody else who said they didn't deserve to go to the playoff.
They didn't play anybody.
And I still stand by it, John, because, okay, they're an ACC team. That's fine. And they had a really good record. That's fine. You lost the best player on your team, which meant you were going to get drubbed when you got to the next level. And you look at it, it's not fair to really compare what they did do because everybody stepped away that was going to be going to the NFL. And they didn't play in the game, which is a soft position, I think. That's really a soft thing to do at your school. But nonetheless, they had a great quarterback, had a great year, and they decided, you know what, you're not going to go because your backup quarterback ain't that good. Well, we got a chance to see the backup quarterback. He ain't that good. They're 0-2 to start off the season, John. They haven't played well. Boston College didn't just beat them. They controlled the game. They ran for something like 270 yards. They had the ball 52 for 100 or 263 yards. This is Florida State. How are they that bad that Boston College just reamed them? I mean, it's one of those things where I think it makes a lot more sense now for anybody who was pushing back on this. When you lose somebody as good as the quarterback they had, things change. Now, can you replace him? Sure. Is he as good? Maybe. But in this case, I'd say no. Do you know who it is? It's the kid who can't stay at his school because nobody seems to like him, John. He was at Clemson. He's at Oregon State. Now he's playing over there at Florida State, and he's not getting it done. The defense isn't getting it done. And that coach, they started off number 10 in the country. You know where they are now? I don't either, because it's probably like number 70 by now at an 0-2 start.
Yeah, well, Pete, how about the U? Crushing Florida. Mm-hmm. And then all the University of Miami players, J.C. Peretz, I'm talking to you. Our friend J.C. Peretz, Pete, from All-Star Charts, he goes back and forth with me about the U because he went to the U. And my God, that was funny as heck, Pete. Florida had all these recruits on the sideline, mm-hmm. and all the U players were going over saying, you should come over here. Don't go there. You should come here with us. We're going to be the next power. And you know what? I think they could be, Pete.
Yeah.
Obviously they know how to do NIL because they were doing NIL before it was legal.
Surprise, surprise.
If you don't think the U can go out there and recruit some players and pay them, and is Coral Gables more fun than Gainesville? Probably. I'd say be careful.
Yeah, I'll tell you, a good friend of ours, I won't mention his name on here because he might not want me to talk about it, but he said, you know what? That just gave Miami the opportunity to hit some of those big hitters that are graduates of their NIL money, since there's no cap, which is the stupidest thing ever. Their NIL money might jump to something like $50 million. And I'm not exaggerating, because where are all these superstars in the crypto world? Well, a lot of them are in Florida. A lot of them went to Miami, and a lot of them want to support the Hurricanes. So it could get pretty interesting, John, and they could become that same power they once were back in the days of Schnellenberger and all the rest of the great coaches that came out of there. All right, next up. Now, the best games this past week, we finally had the real week. I mean, we had a sloth of just unbelievable games. A lot of them were blowouts because people were playing people they probably shouldn't. But Next week, this coming weekend, we've got Michigan going up against Texas, John. Now, Michigan looked okay, probably okay at best against Fresno State, who's not necessarily a power. Good quarterback, good receiver, good running back, but it's Fresno State, and this is Michigan who won the national title. Now, they lost a lot of players, different coach, a lot of things changed at Michigan. They're going to host Texas. Ewers might be the best quarterback this year, I think, in football. We'll have to see how it all plays out. It's one game in, but he did play last year, obviously, and he's been a high. We've all talked about guys like him and Arch Manning. Arch Manning looked great as well. So they are deep, John. I think that game should be absolutely, that might be the best game of this coming week. But I got one that's near and dear to you that I want to throw out there. Colorado. So Colorado beat somebody. They didn't beat them up, and they were a FCS school that's won a lot of national titles at the next level. But nonetheless, North Dakota State, they went down to Colorado, and they put a big hurting on them. Now, they didn't win. Colorado won, and I'm sure, your buddy Dion was going to be dancing around doing that silly little stuff that he does or whatever. But now they got to go to Nebraska. Now, last year, he had the big issue with Nebraska stepping on top of the Buffalo, and then, of course, he had the nerve to have his own players doing that at Oregon, and they got their butt whooped.
Yeah.
that Oregon coach Lanning, John, he looked at that and goes, really? It wasn't okay when Nebraska did that to you, but it's okay to come out here to Oregon and do that to us, huh? All right. They put a whooping on them, and now they're going back up to Nebraska. Now, I guarantee you somebody from Colorado stands somewhere on the big end and tries to scrape their feet on there just to show that they don't like them, right? But however it plays out, Nebraska went in with a freshman quarterback, the highest level quarterback coming into this year. Raiola, who's, I think his father was the one, maybe it's his uncle, I think it's father, who played at Nebraska, offensive lineman, big, tough son of a gun. Anyway, that kid had a great game this past week. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. But Nebraska's got a team that looks like they can run the ball. They got a team that looks like they can probably throw the ball pretty well, which is a little bit unusual. This is going to be an interesting game because what if they knock out Colorado right out of the gate, who went back to the Big 12 this year? It's going to be a very competitive Big 12 this year. They can't afford to lose to Nebraska. And I'm going to say it right now. Nebraska beats them. What do you think?
Well, Nebraska's a 7.5-point pick. So Pete's not exactly going out on the edge here, folks.
I didn't even know that. I figured it was a pick 'em.
7.5-point pick. But I'll tell you what has to happen, in my opinion, Pete, because Colorado, even though Dion was primarily a defensive player, offensive threat, sure. Punt returns, kick returns, that's offense. It's not, the offense, 11 guys lined up to run the ball or pass, but he would occasionally line up as a slot back or a wide receiver. I get it, but he is a defensive back. He doesn't have a defense at Colorado, Pete. I mean, last year they beat Nebraska. I think Nebraska was surprised by how good Shadur and Hunter were and how they just tore them up. This year, their defense looks as bad as it did last year, Pete, against good teams. Against the Bison, North Dakota State, they didn't look great.
Nope.
They let them score, 26, 28 points, something like that. So I'd say Colorado needs turnovers to win. And like you said, Raiola, don't know if he's going to do that. But on the run defense, they got none. They got no answer. Hopefully the defensive coordinator, Pete, will have them slanting a lot or doing something to try to fill the gaps there because they don't have the big thumping defensive guys that you need to shut down a big, strong running game like Nebraska. And those big farm boys, they love to just plow ahead, just like Kansas State, just like Kansas. Those three teams usually have big, strong offensive lines. And like I say, I think it's without turnovers, they do lose by 7 to 10 points.
Yeah, I didn't even know that line. I didn't, I swear.
But Shadur, on the other hand, he's going to put up some points.
Yep.
So I don't think that Nebraska's defense is going to be able to shut him down, Pete. So I'd say Nebraska will probably win, and it could even be another game just like the Bison last week. It could be reversed though. Colorado might score 26 and Nebraska scores 30 because I don't know if they can stop them from running, and I don't know if they're going to let Raiola throw a lot, especially since Hunter plays every single down, Pete. That kid didn't leave the field. That's how good he is.
Yeah.
And he did the same thing last year. It's not a new thing. So watch that kid. He is something to behold, and that kid should be a Heisman candidate for sure.
Oh, for sure. He definitely should. I don't know if Shedeur should, but he should. Hunter should be up for it. I think.
Both ways. He could be All-American at either position, Pete.
The North Dakota State quarterback, John, threw for 277 yards against Colorado, by the way. Cam Miller is his name. He also led his team in running. I mean, North Dakota State is no joke. And I think that Colorado didn't have any idea how good they really were. Matter of fact, North Dakota State was up at halftime 20-17. So they were actually leading at halftime and then slipped back a little bit. I'll tell you what, Nebraska put up 500 yards. They actually held, now it's Fresno State, let's be honest. But
it was UTEP, right?
UTEP. Yeah, UTEP. I said the wrong one. Their defense, however, I don't know if they're black shirts or not. It's way too early, but they held them to 200 yards, and they put up 500 yards. And a lot of it was passing, but they also averaged about 4.5, 5 yards a carry. So this might be, Coach Rule is doing a hell of a job recruiting. This might be a Nebraska of old this year because they brought in some horses. They went into the portal, and they look I think they look different than they did last year. And last year, they just were a team that was brand new coach, all of that, lost a lot of people to the portal. This year, I think they gained in the portal, and I think they're a much better football team for sure.
Well, I'm going to say two things real quick, Pete. One, Nebraska, the reason they went out of gas, not Nebraska, I'm sorry, North Dakota, is because you're playing at altitude. And you and I talked about that already. Yeah. So one advantage Colorado has coming from altitude to Nebraska is even though it's going to be hot, probably in Nebraska, they're running downhill because they've been training at altitude, if you will. Yep. So you got to factor that in. Second, we'll have to cover this tomorrow, Pete. But the freaking Clemson Tigers, oh my. Apparently, they're going to need to open that portal next year because they're not in the same league with now granted, it's Georgia, Pete.
It's Georgia.
It's
best
a
team.
really good football team, but they didn't deserve to be on the field with them.
No, they were a little bit of an embarrassment for the ACC along with Florida State, right? I mean, so it kind of makes things not look so great. Cal actually looked pretty good. They didn't play anybody, but they played pretty well, actually. That's an ACC team for the people who don't know it. They ain't in the Pac-12 anymore, John. They're in the ACC, but they happen to be on the West Coast,
Just happened to be, because it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Well, you want to make sense of the markets, folks, come on over to marketrebellion.com. And if you want to come to our mastermind, it's October 11th in Aventura, Florida. That's just north of Miami. There it is. You got Grant Cardone, Pete Najarian, me, Ryan Mastro, Steve Kalasian, Mark Lepresti, Larry McDonald. It's going to be a fabulous lineup. We're going to trade live all day, October 11th, and you could trade right alongside us, pick up some tips. Fabulous time there. 888-809-8058. That's 888-809-8058. We'll see you tomorrow, 1 o'clock Eastern.